Hello everybody, I'm Jeremy Dickinson. Thank you all for watching and welcome to my YouTube channel, Philosophy Clips. Now in this philosophy clip, I want to talk about moral pluralism. And in particular, I want to work my way to understanding Rossian pluralism. So W.D. Ross, he was a philosopher in the 30s and 40s, that's at least when he was doing philosophy, in the 20th century, and he developed a system that's a thoroughgoing pluralistic system, as we're going to see. And so what I want to do in this video is first just introduce what it means to be a moral pluralist, and then I want to turn my attention to Ross. And in particular there I want to do some stage setting. I want to explain why it is that Ross thought that morality needed to be understood in pluralistic terms. Okay, and then what I'll do in part 2 of my video series, so this will be part 1, it's going to be introductory, and in part 2 I'll turn my attention to Ross's normative system. I'll talk about his normative theory and talk about how it's pluralistic. And then in part 3, this will be a 3-part series as noted. In part 3 I'll talk about his value theory, which is pluralistic as well. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's go ahead and talk about what it means to be a moral pluralist. Okay, so this will be general, so it'll apply to Rossian pluralism. It'll really apply to anybody, any philosopher who is a moral pluralist. Okay, so I think it might be easiest to understand moral pluralism in the following way. Think about the common theories that you're going to find in a moral system. There are others, but these are going to be like sort of the central planks of a moral system, and those are going to be those are going to be the normative theory and the value theories, respectively. So you're going to have a normative theory in a moral system, but you're also going to have a value theory. The normative theory is going to give you the principle or the principles that govern action, and then the value theories can provide us with the theory of things that are valuable, okay, the things that are by their very nature valuable, or those things that, as we say, are intrinsically valuable, intrinsically good. So you have the normative theory and you have the value theory. And of course, if you're working out a complete moral theory, you're going to talk about how these theories are related, and then you can do a whole host of other things otherwise. But at the very least, these are two central components to a moral system. So the way I like to think about moral pluralism is that in the normative theory, it's going to be the case that you've got more than one fundamental normative principle, okay? Or you're going to have in your value theory more than one, or you're going to have a set of things that count as intrinsically valuable. So you're going to have more than one intrinsically good thing, right? Or both are going to be true of the moral system. So one's going to be a thoroughgoing moral pluralist when both their normative theory and their value theories are pluralistic. But of course, one could be a moral pluralist in some way just by either their normative theory being pluralistic or their value theory being pluralistic. Okay, now in logical space, of course, there's different ways that one could go. One could be monistic with respect to their normative theory, meaning that there's only one normative principle, but they could be pluralistic with respect to their value theory. There's more than one thing that's intrinsically good. But conversely, one could be monistic with respect to their value theory. There's one thing that's intrinsically good. But pluralistic with respect to their normative theory, there's more than one normative principle that governs right action. So when thinking about normative theory, we're thinking about right and wrong action. When thinking about value theory, we're thinking about valuable things and disvaluable things, or good things and bad things. Okay? And then we talk about how those things are related to each other, of course, in a completed system. But hopefully you've picked up on it. There's moral pluralism, on the one hand, and there's moral monism on the other hand. Contrast concepts. Okay? Now, an example of a monistic system, just in case you're curious, think about a traditional utilitarian view. And let's just, in slogan form, understand utilitarianism as the principle or as a theory that tells us promote the happiness of all, where promote gets defined in some way or other, all gets defined in some way or other. So we just state the principle in slogan form neutrally, promote the happiness of all. Okay? Now that, according to traditional versions of utilitarianism, we've got a single, we have one fundamental normative principle. The theory is normatively monistic, but it's also value theory, monistic, excuse me. It's value theory monistic. Why? Because what's intrinsically good? What's intrinsically valuable? Happiness. Okay? And sometimes happiness, as many of you know, is defined as pleasure, but that's still one thing. Okay? So we've got there an example of a thoroughgoing moral monism, the traditional utilitarian view. Now, an example of a duty-based as opposed to a consequentialist, duty-based monistic system that's with respect to at least the normative theory. I'll focus on that only here. So a normatively monistic system that's duty-based, not consequentialist, would be, any guesses? The Kantian system, right? So Kant gives us the categorical imperative, the unique supreme principle of morality. Now, okay, keep in mind, Kant does give us several formulations of the categorical imperative, which he says are equivalent with one another. Okay, that's going to be a tough thing to square exegetically, interpretively. We'll set that aside. Kant at least took himself to be providing us with a single normative principle that was fundamental and served as a basis for all of our other moral duties, all of the other moral principles we have to live up to. Okay, all of the other principles then are just going to end up being derived. Okay, so we have two examples of moral monism. We saw the thoroughgoing monism of traditional utilitarianism, and then we saw the normative monism of the Kantian system. And I mentioned those strategically because Ross is going to respond to both of those systems. Okay, so hopefully we understand moral pluralism, and hopefully it was illuminating to see how moral pluralism works in contradistinction to how moral monism works. Okay, so let's turn our attention now. If things are good and you guys are feeling okay, let's turn our attention to the Rossian system, which again was a thoroughgoing system. So the normative system is going to be pluralistic, and the value theory system is going to be pluralistic. And we'll get to those systems more in forthcoming video discussions. So what I want to say here, what I want to talk about next here is how or what motivated Ross to go the route he went. And I was being strategic, as I noted a few moments ago. I talked about the utilitarian system, I talked about the Kantian system. Those were, and those by and large still are, the dominant moral frameworks, okay, that philosophers use to guide them in their theorizing. And so in Ross's day, this was no different. You had the utilitarians and you had the Kantians. And Ross believed that both systems fail. And he offered reasons for why they fail. And seeing his reasons end up helping us understand why it is that Ross went the moral pluralist route that he did. Okay, so let's see if we can understand what's going on here. So let's begin with the utilitarian view. So the utilitarian wants to maintain that there's a single normative principle. Of course, there's a single intrinsic good as well. Set that aside for a moment. Let's just focus on the normative component. I think it'll help us more easily see what Ross is up to. Now, according to the utilitarian and normative view, there's a single, right? A single fundamental normative principle, and we put it this way, right? It's promote the happiness of all. Now, according to Ross, this means that fundamentally our obligations, as it were, because keep in mind the fundamental normative principle is a very, very general obligation or requirement that we have to live up to when we act. Ross claims that it is essentially, fundamentally, agent neutral, meaning that it doesn't respect fundamentally special obligations, or sometimes what we call agent relative obligations. So let me see if I can capture the idea of the difference between an agent neutral principle versus an agent relative principle. I think this will be really important to see, and I'll do so by running a simple trolley case or two. So think about like an original trolley case. There's a trolley zooming down some tracks, and the the person in the trolley looks left and sees a single person on the track, and then on the right sees 5 people. Suppose they're all there non-culpably, so they're not responsible for being, they're not blameworthy for being there, right? But the trolley is going too fast. The trolley speed is too fast to slow down, so either one person's going to be killed or 5 people are going to be killed. The person in the trolley has to make a decision, right? Now, the utilitarian right is going to say what? All things being equal, kill the 1, right? Save the 5. You save 4 lives doing so, okay? Now, when you think about what utilitarianism tells us to do with its fundamental principle, promote the happiness of all, it does so in an agent-neutral way. It makes no essential reference to any agent whatsoever. So that's a way of understanding what it means to say that a principle is agent-neutral. It makes no essential reference to any specific agent. But now, consider a trolley case where there it is, it's you in the trolley. I want to specify a specific individual. There, you're in the trolley. Put yourself in the trolley. You're zooming along. And the person on the left this time in the trolley is your mother. So we'll call this the mom trolley case. The first case we call the original trolley case. In the mom trolley case, there you are zooming along. You see your mother, and you see 5 strangers to the right. There's at least some pressure, isn't there, to say that you have an obligation to save your mother in the case and kill the 5. She's your mother, after all. You have special responsibilities, special duties to your mother. And what Ross would want to say is, this is an example where we have an agent-relative obligation, because it makes essential reference to the person who's in the trolley, namely you in this case. Okay, because if you put me in the trolley, just for simplicity's sake, or you put a stranger, just put a stranger, not me. You put a stranger in the trolley, right? All things being equal, right? That individual should perhaps kill your mom. Sorry to say that. But that would be an example of like running the case in an agent-neutral way. But when we think about it's you in the trolley and the special relationship you have to your mom, there's at least some force, there's at least some pressure to say that you have an obligation to save your mother and kill the 5 in that case. Now here's Ross. It goes against common sense, doesn't it, to say that in circumstances like the mom trolley case, you'd have to go agent neutral, right, and kill your own mom. But that's what utilitarianism, it seems, is committed to. So Ross claims that goes against powerful common sense intuitions. Indeed, Ross, he takes himself to be a champion of common sense thinking. And so he takes it to be a serious knock against the utilitarian view that it can't accommodate agent-relative duties, fundamental agent-relative duties, duties that correspond to the special obligations that we have. Now, on this note that Ross is deeply concerned with common sense thinking, he thinks that that's where we've got to begin thinking about moral matters and refine our thinking accordingly. Ross also thinks that the Kantian view fails. Kant took himself to be a champion of common sense moral thinking. That may shock you because the categorical imperative doesn't appear to be, in any of his formulations, to be commonsensical. Okay, maybe once you unpack them, they seem more commonsensical. But Kant took himself to be a champion of common sense thinking. And Ross claims that Kant's system fails at that. It may capture some features of common sense thinking, but certainly doesn't capture it well enough. And why not? Well, Ross takes aim at Kant's categorical imperative in the following way. What Ross wants to say is that Kant's categorical imperative, by Kant's own lights, rules out the possibility of ever telling a lie morally. So the way Kant is traditionally understood here, and there's some debate about this, but not much, Kant is traditionally understood as maintaining that lying is always wrong. There is never a possible case in which it's permissible to tell a lie. So some people look at Kant's discussion of the categorical imperative. For the earnest viewer of this video, look up Kant's lying promiser case. And some philosophers look at that and say it looks like Kant's committed to saying that lying is always, in every possible circumstance, wrong. Ross definitely interpreted Kant as maintaining that. And what Ross says is that goes deeply against common sense thinking, because surely there are cases in which it's permissible, they may be rare, to tell a lie. In particular cases where telling a lie offsets significant, unnecessary damage or pain or harm to somebody, perhaps even including oneself. So Kant's system, according to Ross, like the utilitarian system, goes against common sense moral thinking, and that inclined Ross toward a moral pluralist system, which I'll get into more next time. Thank you all for watching.